Hello everyone, good night, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Now today we're going to be talking about misconceptions you might have heard during World War II, or about World War II. You've played games, you've watched the movies, and maybe you've even studied history. Well, what if I told you that much of what you think you know about World War II is wrong? From overhyped weapons to forgotten battlefronts, today we're diving into the biggest misconceptions. This is Imperial Insights, and let's set this record straight. So, for the first misconception, I'm going to make it easy on you guys. Probably heard this one, you might even know it yourself. Big misconception is the US won World War II by themselves. Thanks to Hollywood and Western media, you think that the USA rolled into Europe, beat the Nazis, and called it a day. But the truth? The Eastern Front was the deadliest theater of the entire war, and the Soviet Union paid the highest price. Nearly 27 million soldiers died. The Battle of Stalingrad alone had more casualties than the entire U.S. military saw in the entire war. That's not to downplay America's role. D-Day, the Pacific Campaign, and Lend-Lease aid were all critical. But World War II was a team effort, and the cost was global. And in most World War II games, though, you are almost always an American GI with an M1 Grand storming Normandy. Well, that's iconic. It's just one chapter of a much larger, bloodier book. Now, games and movies often portray Nazi Germany as a technological powerhouse, with jet planes, rocket troops, and wonder weapons. That could have turned the tide if only they had more time. And sure, the Germans did develop advanced tech, the V-2 rocket, the Me-262 jet fighter, and even prototypes for guided missiles. But here's the reality. Most of their tech was either rushed, unreliable, or arrived far too late to matter. And a little bit of a gaming tie-in, what you're watching right now, Hearts of Iron 4. In Hearts of Iron, you can fast-track Nazi Germany's research and develop Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons, that dominate the skies and the battlefield. But that's the best-case fantasy. In real life, these weapons drained resources from conventional arms and production, and were often strategic blunders. Hitler was obsessed with super weapons, but while his scientists worked on jet fighters, Allied bombers were flattening German cities. And meanwhile, the Allies were focused on mass production, logistics, and scalability, the things that win real wars. The Sherman tank might have not been the best on paper, but there were tens of thousands of them, and the Germans just could not match that industrial scale. To loop things back to what we were discussing earlier, when most people think of World War II, they picture American GIs storming the beaches of Normandy, British Spitfires battling over London, or tanks rolling into Berlin. But World War II wasn't just a war fought in Europe. It was a truly global conflict, one that engulfed every continent except Antarctica. And ignoring that scale distorts the reality of how the war was fought and won. Let's just talk about the Asia-Pacific theater, the other half of the war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan expanded rapidly, taking over the Philippines, Guam, Malaya, Singapore, and even parts of New Guinea. But their war didn't start there. Japan had invaded China years earlier. In 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War was one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history, and it's often treated just like a footnote. Chinese resistance tied down over 1 million Japanese troops, resources that couldn't be used elsewhere. And this front, often called the Forgotten War, saw the deaths of tens of millions. When you watch a World War II movie or play a game, how often do you see the Battle of Wuhan or the siege of, bear with me, Changsha? And the Pacific theater was brutal, slow, and deeply psychological. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, every inch of that territory was hard-won, Marines fought in the jungles, swamps, and volcanic rock under constant artillery fire, kamikaze attacks, and not to mention tropical diseases. These weren't just side missions, they were decisive battles. At Okinawa alone, over 200,000 people died, more than at Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and yet more people can only name Iwo Jima because that one famous flag raising photo. The war in the Pacific was just as savage as anything on the Eastern Front, and often even more personal. Now let's talk about North Africa and the Middle East. There's the whole North Africa campaign. The desert war between Rommel's Afrika Korps and the British 8th Army wasn't just tanks in the sand. It was about controlling the Suez Canal, vital oil routes, and access to the Middle East. The Battle of Al Men, Tobruk, and Kasserine Pass shaped the Allies' early fortunes. And again, colonial troops did much of the fighting, soldiers from India, Kenya, Morocco, Australia. And some other forgotten fronts? The Arctic convoys, frozen lifelines of supplies to the USSR, dodging German U-boats, and storming the Barents Sea. The Balkans, Yugoslavian partisans, waging a guerrilla war, tying up German divisions far from the main front. The Philippines and Burma, jungle warfare with allied, local, and resistance forces fighting Japanese occupation. Latin America, even Brazil sent troops to fight in Italy. I mean, it was truly a global war. And Hoi 4, or Hearts of Iron 4, deserves its credit. It lets you manage China, Africa, Pacific, but let's be real, most players start up as Germany or the US and immediately go for those big theaters like France or Russia. And it just reflects how pop culture prioritizes Western narratives, even in a sandbox game where you can rewrite history. And why this matters? Understanding World War II as a global war changes how we see modern geopolitics. It helps explain the Cold War's rise, the fall of European empires, and tensions in the Pacific that still exist to this day. If we only focus on Europe, we miss half the story and the lessons that come with it. Alright, and this is a great segue for our next misconception. The war ended when Hitler died. It's a popular Hollywood trope. Hitler dies, the Nazi surrenders, and the world breathes a sigh of relief. But in reality, the end of World War II was far more complex and far from immediate. Hitler's death didn't stop the war overnight. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker as Soviet forces closed in. But Germany didn't surrender the next day. In fact, the fighting continued for another week. His successor, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, tried to negotiate with Western allies while still resisting the Soviets in the east. Some German forces fought until May 7th, and even later in places like Czechoslovakia. In fact, some didn't surrender until May 9th, and isolated units in pockets like Norway or the Channel Islands held out longer. And the Pacific War was still raging. The biggest flaw in this myth, the war wasn't even close to over in the Pacific. It was still escalating. Japan hadn't surrendered, and the battles still to come were some of the bloodiest of the entire war. Okinawa, fought through April to June 1945, claimed over 200,000 lives, many of them unfortunately civilians. The U.S. was preparing for Operation Downfall, a full-scale invasion of Japan, which was projected to cause up to 1 million Allied casualties. And Japan's military showed no signs of quitting, despite crippling losses. And then you have the atomic bomb and the Soviet invasion. It wasn't Hitler's death, but a combination of overwhelming force that finally ended the war on August 6th and 9th, and the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But even then, Japan didn't immediately surrender. It took the Soviet Union declaring war on Japan and invading Manchuria on August 8th to finally push Japan to the edge. The Japanese emperor announced surrender on August 15th. Over 3 months after Hitler's death, the official peace treaty wasn't even signed until September 2nd, 1945. And back to bring it to gaming, most World War II games wrap up once Berlin falls. For an example, Call of Duty World at War ends with the Soviet raising the flag over the Reichstag, a dramatic finale, but only half of the story. And Hearts of Iron can simulate the full Pacific War, and I know I fall victim to this. Most players don't go that far. Once Germany is defeated, the motivation kind of fades, the game kind of turns into a slogfest, the AI is a mess, but that's a different story. Why this really matters, the ending the story with Hitler gives the illusion that World War II was a one-man show, that defeating one evil man ended the world's worst war. But that war continued, and so did the suffering. Millions more died after Hitler's death, and some consequences, like occupation, civil wars, and famine, dragged on for many years after. Let's be honest, most World War II games prioritize excitement over accuracy. And while that's understandable, it's also where a lot of myths start. From the way guns work to how battles play out, gaming has shaped a very stylized version of World War II. Take the MP40 for example, the iconic German submachine gun. In games, it's often portrayed as laser accurate and dominant at close range. In reality, it was relatively rare. Compared to bolt-action rifles like the KR or the KAR-98K, it had major accuracy issues beyond short distances. Or, look at the Thompson, the Tommy gun. It's everywhere in games. Fast, deadly, and stylish. But the real version was heavy, expensive to produce, and mostly issued to officers or specialized units. Most American infantry actually carry the M1 Garand, we were talking about it earlier, a semi-automatic rifle that gets far less screen time. And now games like Call of Duty World War II, weapons are often chosen for gameplay balance. Understandable, but not realism. Guns are often made more powerful, faster, or more accurate than they ever were. Meanwhile, you got real-life concerns like weapon jams, low ammo, supply shortages, all those things are almost completely ignored. And let's not forget about the weight fatigue or actual training. In games, everyone's a sharpshooter, and, reloading takes like half a second. Now, if we're going to get a little bit into the battles here, most games compress time and space for obvious reasons. A 5-hour firefight gets turned into a 10-minute set piece. Understandable, but, this can create misleading impressions about how combat actually worked. Take D-Day, portrayed in dozens of games as a fast-paced assault, where soldiers sprint across the beach under fire. But the real invasion was chaos. Seasick troopers, thrown up over the side of these boats, mislanded units, destroyed equipment. Some units were even pinned down for hours before even moving off the beach. Now, why is this important? Games aren't history books, and they don't have to be. But when people play these battles over and over, it shapes their understanding of what World War II was like. And if we're not careful, the action-packed version can completely overwrite the brutal, messy, and deeply human truth of what actually happened. Even in Hearts of Iron, and honestly, it's my favorite game. That's why we keep referencing it. Where focus is on strategy and politics, some myths persist. Countries can switch ideologies with a few clicks. Supply lines are very abstract. And while the game does include historical depth, it allows for wild what-if scenarios like a communist USA or a victorious, Nazi Japan. Now, these are fun to explore, but, they're not how history played out. And without context, players might think these outcomes were more likely than they really were. So let's run it back. World War II didn't start with Pearl Harbor, started years earlier in places most games never even touch. The Nazis weren't unstoppable masterminds, they made huge mistakes, and honestly were stretched thin most of the time. The war wasn't just in Europe, it spanned Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and more. And Hitler's death didn't end it, the war dragged on, especially in the Pacific, and the weapons and battles we see in games, they're often more Hollywood than history. Now, games are a great way to explore history. They make it interactive, personal, even emotional. But they also simplifies, dramatize, and sometimes distort. If we don't question what we're shown, we can end up believing a version of World War II that never really even happened. Now, this isn't about ruining your favorite game, it's about deepening your understanding. The more we dig into real history, the more meaningful our gameplay becomes. Now, if you learned something new, or if I just ruined your favorite World War II mission, drop a like, leave a comment, we can talk about it. I got more deep dives coming, so hit subscribe if you want to see how gaming stacks up against the facts. Thank you for watching Imperial Insights, where we bring the past to play. I'm fairly new at this YouTube thing, so your mercy is much appreciated. Thank you all for watching, and have a great one.